Thanks for joining us for another episode of Biotech and Life Sciences CEO Stories. Today, we're really privileged to have one of the most personally interesting guests that we've had on the podcast, Zach Brooks, who is the founder and CEO of UGenome AI, a company whose mission it is to use AI to democratize access to genomic information in the pursuit of personalized medicine. Thanks for taking the time to join us, Zach. Before we
Yeah,
get to
it's
your amazing personal story and the ways in which it is reflected, tell me, how is your mission reflected by your personal story?
wow. What a fantastic. Well, it's really a privilege to see you again and be on the show and talk to some of the people who you talk to through this format. What a fantastic question. I don't really talk about that very much because I try to just have the work that we do prove its stand on its own, like kind of prove the point. So I've had two kidney transplants in my life, and so I've been around biotech, on a very personal level for, now all of this century and a little bit of the last century. I got my first kidney transplant in 1999. And those transplants are driven, especially in the post transplantation caregiving, is driven a lot by medications. And so, like dialing in the medications, figure out what's medications best for you. There's a lot of trial and error in that, and so forth. And it's really like a magical monument to the 20th century, doctors and researchers and all sorts of other folks. But it's not perfect. So I had to get a second transplant in large part because the first transplant it didn't work out. And the first transplant didn't work out because of one of the medications I was on. So when I say things like we're trying to get someone a better treatment option based on their genetic profile, I'm thinking very much about me, 20 years ago, having to go through a second transplant, not wanting someone else to have to go through that because we simply guessed wrong which medication was going to work better for that particular person's profile. So that's the quick, short answer. So I'm very driven from my own personal perspective, but very much I want not that another person has to deal with something I've dealt with.
Great. So you started UGenome in September 2022, right?
Yep.
And that was right around the time that ChatGPT was announced.
Hmm.
What drew you to the idea of using AI to analyze genomic data without
Well,
much in the way of historical perspective, in terms of the fact that it was just invented? So how did you begin?
yeah, I mean the origin story. I mean, yeah, I actually saw that. I think we started the same day of Chat GPT, the September 27th, 2022. Within a few weeks, I think we started. So um, my own quick background into this is my third life science company that I've worked at from University of Arizona Technologies. So one is in radiopharmaceuticals, a company called Theracia, a fantastic company run by my friend. Another company, Botanicel Analytics, Raman spectroscopy, so lasers to detect for viruses. We did work with Harvard, Beth Israel. And then the same commercialization office asked me, you've been around this quite a while now. Would you like to start your own? And so a lot of it was just a personal incentive to just kind of start some company. But when I looked at the technology and I started looking into bioinformatics and pharmacogenomics and all this data out there, I just thought, making sense of data and making that data clinically actionable better than what it is right now through wonderful pathology and all these wonderful people out there is really powerful, really, really powerful, because the idea of all of these technologies is it's one thing to have data, but it's not enough to have data. You have to make sense of it. And how do you make sense of, gigabytes and terabytes of data? Well, you have to have the tools to do so. So that was sort of my instinct right then. I'd done some market research pretty quickly before I said yes. And it was clear that there was a lot of opportunity to make a business out of this, number one, but really make a great impact for humans, number two.
So you had this idea that AI could be used in
Mhm.
genomic data, but an idea is different from a reality. What was the first thing that you did? How did you how did you get your arms around this enormous task?
Yeah, I try to simplify. So I've written two self-help books. So a lot of my leadership comes from my self-help author mindset. And, it's one thing, and I've been around technologies for a long time. I worked at two Silicon Valley companies, different times in my life. One of my titles was cryptographic business operations. So I've been around technologies with lots of information for a long time. And I guess my instinct, my heuristic is that it's one thing to have wonderful technology, but if you don't have human operational forces, dynamics behind that, you're not going to really advance the technology at all. So I'm very much a culture driven, mission driven kind of person anyway. So I said, we're going to be a mission driven company first, and we're going to really work on how we interact with each other, how we care about each other. If we're treat each other well in any capacity, maybe we'll be some sort of really good model for ourselves and others to be a good healthcare company, and that can then transfer into the customers we work with, the collaborators we work with, and so forth. Because I've been around enough startup companies, and people exhaust themselves, and then they're no good to themselves, no good to their families, no good to the people they work with, and then they may or may not hit it, as it were. So right away, it was like great to have the technology, but if we don't slow down and just like deal with analog technologies, which is human beings living one day after the next, we're not going to have any chance for success whatsoever. So we built a lot of our company based on culture and mission and vision, and we have other kind of things in place to keep ourselves just looking after each other as humans. We don't schedule meetings for Fridays. We intentionally limit the number of meetings we have during the week, so we have time to take care of the things we say we're going to do with each other. We take the weekends off. We're not in the business to kill each other. We're in the business to look after each other and look after the people we ultimately want to treat and help in some capacity.
Can you explain the tools that you've developed at UGenome, and I guess in part, um, what your mode is, why they're better than everything
Yeah,
else out there?
yeah, thanks. A great question and great timing. So we're launching in quarter 1 of 2025 our two beta launches for two software genomic tools. So the first one is called Propex, and the second one is called Max. And so I'll talk about those in a little bit of detail in that order. So Propex is a pharmacogenomic extractor. So we take pharmacogenes, which are more complex than regular genes, and they're more complex because it's not just genes, it's a reaction to medication. So right away, you have two variables, and you have two variables, it's more complex than one. And then you take pharmacogenes, medications available, disease state, you put that in a blender, as it were, and out comes a better recommendation on which medications you should take, Tim, based on your genetic profile, and medications you should avoid based on your genetic profile, and also some dosing information. So we have a suite of services, an at-home test kit, and some software we're building to help personalize medicine through personalized medication. So that's Propex. We think it's better because our customers are coming to us because they have a lot of data, want to make sense of it, and they want to make sense of it from a pharmacogenomic perspective, meaning getting insights into medication treatment for various disease states, disease indicators. So that's what we're launching in quarter 1 of 2025. That's our beta test, and we have now four early customers kind of for that product. And the second one is called Max.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
Zach,
go ahead, please.
before you continue, can I ask you kind of a follow-up? You
Oh,
mentioned
please.
at-home testing,
Yes.
and that people had a lot of data. How are you going to translate what is a pretty, at least sophisticated mission in terms of personalized medicine, if not a sophisticated process,
Hmm.
to people at home? How will you do
Yes.
that, and how will you get them to accept it, to uptake it?
Yeah. So working with our partners, we have an at-home test kit. It's, since COVID, we're all very familiar with at-home test kits more than we were before. And we have a swab. It's not a nose swab, it's cheek swab. Takes 5 minutes, you put it back in the box, send it on its way, and then we analyze the data. So it's a basic at-home genetic test kit. We do the pharmacogenomic analysis on top of that with our pharmacist licensed in a total of 5 states. And then, really importantly, our pharmacist will talk to the person and help them walk them through that report so they get information from where they are, their understanding level, what's going on, which medications they should kind of be aware of what the report says. But then importantly, they take that information and go to their doctor and say, it looks like maybe I need to avoid certain kind of medications. I've been going to the hospital over and over again 5 or 6 times this year, and I just can't dial in which medications I need. So that's one way to do it, is have a very much a concierge kind of service to the people taking those at-home test kits.
Will it, do you anticipate marketing it through physicians or direct to the consumer?
Well, that one's right now a B2C product, but it's more B2C to C, or B2B, excuse me, B2C to B back again, or the other way around. So a lot of the people we're targeting are smaller functional medicine type of facilities who don't have necessarily the capability to do these types of tests. But with this, they can up their game and then compete against larger service groups who have the capabilities to offer in-home or in-house pharmacogenetic testing. So we're going to be working with small to medium kind of groups who need the capabilities, and they can get the capabilities through us.
I see. Okay. Okay. So now tell us about Max.
Sure, and thanks for those questions. Max. So Max is the intellectual property we licensed from the University of Arizona to launch UGenome. In Max, we're now on version 6. We've really worked hard at developing Max. And what Max does, our application, there's 2 uses for it. The one I'll talk about is just one of them is CRISPR off-target effects. So, or gene editing more generally. So when you're doing a gene edit, a CRISPR edit, sometimes you can accidentally induce a mutation. And if you induce a mutation while you're trying to figure out what's going on, you obviously are taking a couple steps backward and making that particular technology not usable. But if at the outset you have a sense of where to cut, and at the end of that process you have a way to analyze exactly how well you have edited that gene, then you have a pretty nice tool that can help people really advance their technologies much quicker and faster. Now, there's a lot of tools out there in the market. We're very aware of that. But a lot of the tools that are available out there are only available to like the largest, most well-funded, large corporations. There's gazillions of smaller, medium-sized companies doing lots of things, and sometimes they don't have the capabilities to do these kinds of things. So this is a CRISPR off-target analytical tool, so you can really help drive the clinical outcomes that can be derived from CRISPR.
Interesting. So the only thing I see as much in the news as AI is CRISPR.
Mm-hmm.
Are you working with anyone, any of the CRISPRs, the Intellias, those kinds of people on these, or?
Yeah, so we talked to one company in Southern California about using this, but we talked to them when we were just at the outset of thinking about this use case. Now, about 6 months later, we've proven through our own internal mechanisms we can validate that this is a use case. Now we're going to start going back to some of the same companies and saying, does this make sense? We're doing a lot of business development and getting really good feedback from people, and some being very, very specific about which particular disease indicator with which tool this particular tool might work for. So we're very confident that we're building tools from the market immediately, but we still have to go back over and over to the market to make sure this is really a tool someone would use in their particular workflow. And that's important to us. We're very agnostic, like whatever tool comes out of these processes, we care that we're a solution forward company for the groups we work with.
It sounds like that solution was something that you kind of backed into. You weren't thinking
Yeah, I would say
when you
so.
developed Max. It came after Max's development. Is that right?
That's absolutely true. So the other use case for Max is a cancer variant detector. And so we're using something called a personalized reference genome. So reference genomes were created with 16 humans or something like that. You and I are 99.5% similar. And so I always kind of talk about reference genomes as a giant Excel spreadsheet with 8 billion entries, the population of Earth. Well, fantastic. And the fact that we're all very similar, with a reference genome, you can really have some useful information from that. But what about women 35 to 39? What about men 60 to 64? What about African American? What about Asian American? What about a different group of people? Well, then it's nice to have a customized reference genome to get more specific data and information from whole genome sequencing, for example, to make something useful out of this. And so this cancer variant detector from the customized reference genomes we're making is really the idea of taking that same Excel spreadsheet with one tab and making 25,000 tabs with subpopulations of people. So then you're only analyzing data from a group of people that's similar to you. So you're targeting better treatment options based on more specific information. And this is the big problem with, women or underrepresented groups. And a lot of the data-driven approaches, they haven't been represented in the data the same way that other folks have. And so sometimes you give a woman a medication, well, it doesn't work for her body because she weighs less, she has different kind of things going on, and you get adverse drug effects. And the same thing happens with cancer treatments and so forth. So with more specific treatment options through this customized reference genome, the idea is that we can drive better clinical outcomes, even though it's more of a research preclinical tool right now. That particular use case, it's interesting, and we're finding some very, very specific uses for it, but it's not quite as broad and potentially impactful as the CRISPR off-target effects.
Really?
Yeah.
So, but originally it was about cancer variants and adverse drug reactions.
Yeah, those are the two things right now. There's just so many tools out there. So if you're working with a large organization, they're really smart people all up and down any of these organizations. They're constantly playing with these tools and tweaking them and so forth. They have a lot of their own solutions. Whether or not our solution is more elegant or not, it's not really important. They have a solution that works for them. It works very well. So there's not really need to adopt it, or the adoption of our tool is for such a specific case. They would have to have more cases to really want to adopt it. Now, there are some people who are still interested in it, but it just looks like it's going to be a very specific niche product more than the other tools that we're developing. The attention we're getting really is for ProPEX, the pharmacogenomic extractor. And going into 2025, that's where we're going to be pushing most of our efforts.
So what are pharmacogenomics? What are they?
Yeah, so pharmacogenomics is this. It's the response to medication. That's it. Response to medication. So you take a medication and you respond to it. Now, we all respond to medications. At some level, we all respond, not fantastically to medications because it is a foreign thing going into our body. So our body is going to react to that. Now, if it reacts to that in a small way, but then we get the benefit like aspirin, and it cures our headache or takes that pain from the headache away, great. That's a good use case for aspirin. And like there's a temporary, maybe I have a slight stomach upset, but my headache goes away. Good. That's a good trade-off to take aspirin. But when you talk about adverse drug reactions, it's really when those adverse drug reactions go well beyond just a basic small reaction to that medication. And so the big numbers from adverse drug reactions are this: 106,000 people die every year.
Wow.
350,000 people are hospitalized every year from adverse drug reactions. 1.3 million people go to the ER. It's the fourth leading cause of death in the United States. I think it's 6 billion prescriptions are prescribed annually, and it's a $500 billion cost to the economy. So we're just simply trying to do our part to address this giant, big behemoth of adverse drug reactions through our tool that would help people get a better sense of the medication good for them right away. So our tagline for this suite of services and solutions is, instead of trial and error, how about smile and care? And it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I have talked to anyone, more likely a woman than a man. Women suffer more adverse drug reactions than men. I'll have stories going back and forth to the pharmacy multiple times to try to track down something that is get them some sort of relief. So if you could like cut down from 6 visits to the pharmacist and 6 visits to the doctor to find out the one medication to 2, well, that woman's not going back and forth to the hospital, the CVS, Walgreens. Her life is better simply because she's not driving back and forth. She's not getting sick from the first medication that gave her an adverse drug reaction and so forth. So think about the cascading problems that come from adverse drug reactions. It's pretty staggering. So that's the world we're trying to jump into and address. And we're writing all sorts of articles and use cases to make ourselves really strong in that space.
And I guess if you could solve that problem, that issue, you'd go a long way toward improving trust in the healthcare system so that,
Yeah,
you know, um, less educated patient doesn't go home saying, the doctor doesn't know what he's doing.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Tim. And a big issue, I'm sure you know this, for any a clinician will be compliance. Like I prescribed my patient X, Y, and Z, they didn't take it. So it's not quite an adverse drug reaction problem, but if that patient has had a previous problem by taking an earnest medication prescribed and hasn't had a good experience, it wouldn't be surprising they would be kind of doubtful the next time around. So
Right,
if you can be more specific the first time around, saying, John, we think based on your genetic profile and based on the test, this set of medications are going to be best for you, and they get it right the first time, I think that's going to engender the trust, exactly what you're asking about.
right, good. So, where did the data sets come from?
Yeah, so we're asked that all the time. So we don't generate our own data. We have tools that work with numerous types of data sets. So we have a data set tracker internally, kind of tracking all sorts of data sets, research, consortium, some private as well, that we can use those data sets when needed. But oftentimes our customers will bring those data sets to us. So most of our customers in the pharmacogenomic space have data sets they bring to us. And they're trying to make sense of it from a perspective of trying to get better medication options. So the disease indicators that have come to us have been in pediatrics, transplantation, mental health, and there's one other I'm forgetting right now. But across the board, people are saying, "I got this great data set, and trying to make sense of it. I'm making sense of it, but at some point, the way treatment is instantiated in our system so often comes through a medication. And it's great to have all this sort of data, some sort of pyramid to get to the top of this point. And the top of that point is the spear pointed at clinical treatment options, medications. And if that's not in order, that's not in place, then how do you actually help people with medication treatments? So that's why they're coming to us. And so we have the tools to help them analyze that data and to be really good. Like we can be a white label group to help lots of groups be very, very good at what they're doing, very specifically help the targeted people they're helping.
Do you have to structure their data in order to analyze it later?
There's always going to be some structuring and some cleaning and some analysis, and maybe you have to like transfer some files and so forth. There's always going to be some of that, no matter what. But generally speaking, we're just trying to make ourselves a broad-based organization that can use any type of data, and are building our tools that way. Our tools can work with lots of different kind of data. We have to transfer data from one type to the other, but otherwise it still works. So we're trying to be very open to any sort of organization we work with.
And are you able to do that yourselves, or do you farm it out to a Snowflake, a Databricks, wherever?
Yeah, right now we're doing a lot of it ourselves. I mean, a lot of times our model as a new kind of startup company is we want to bring it in-house in order to learn well enough what we're trying to do for our own uh, product market philosophies. We have our product philosophy written. Now, once we kind of figure it out to some degree, let's say 90% of our own excellence, then we can start farming it out because we understand what we need internally. So yes, we work with external groups, but we would prefer to first kind of figure out what works with our product market philosophy and then go to a client and say, this is what we need. That's been our approach so far.
Do you find that big pharma is trying to do this kind of thing themselves, or are they looking for people like you to do it for them?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think yes to all of the above. So, like large organizations, oftentimes they have some in-house group working on something. Let's say it's something we're doing very directly. Uh, but for example, you have an in-house, like a large pharma company or some sort of similar type of company, very large, and they have lots of resources. But then in those large organizations, they're fighting over the same resources. So they're trying to find a crack team of bioinformaticians in their large organization to help them with this particular solution, but they can't because they're 6 months behind on the queue to get that crack team in-house to help them with something. So they're aware they want to work on this. So they'll like come to us and say, please help us with this particular set of problems. They'll go outside of their own structure and just use some R&D money to pay us to do that kind of thing. And then the reason why there's so many different accelerators coming from large pharma organizations is because they don't have all the solutions. So they'll want to work with lots of very select group, but still lots of different small biotech companies who are working on solutions they haven't thought of. Maybe the solutions that we're working at are novel compared to what they're doing. So it's kind of all of the above, I think, with pharma companies. They're certainly very smart, incredibly smart people all across the board, but because the organizations themselves are built on these enterprise models and they have very clear markets they're going after, sometimes they don't always get the R&D synced up the way they want to, so they're willing to work with a small group like us.
But Zach, if you're using data that otherwise is in the public realm, then I have to assume that other AI companies are doing the same.
Mm-hmm.
So same data in, how do you generate different data out
It's a
than
fantastic organization, and maybe we won't sometimes. Maybe that's just the answer. Sometimes we won't generate different data out, but then it comes down to, this is where I go back to our philosophy. So the philosophy that I adopted early on, like there's all this technology, but we have this analog technology as well called humans, with something called infinite eight. So infinite eight is a way that we have our back end of the house and our front end of the house work in tandem. So like, why would an organization choose us over another organization who has similar data? Well, maybe our mission lines up better. Maybe the way we train people in-house works better. Maybe more synced up with their marketing, branding kind of things and so forth. So that's why these like basic business, customer service, mission, vision, values are so important, because especially early on, we might do our absolute best to build the best possible products. And maybe they're fantastic products objectively, but maybe they're not going to hit the market at the right time and so forth. So it's really important we build an organization that has a way to build yet the next best product at the end of 2025, going into 2026, 2027. Because it might be the case that we build a great product, but it's similar. So why would someone choose us over someone else? Well, I think they would choose us if we're aligned with them, with what their goals are and so forth. And how are we going to be aligned with them? Well, if we study who they are, we get to know them as people, get to know them as professionals, and then try to really manifest people who care about the same things we do. So that's why these differentiators sometimes are not going to be strictly technological. They're also going to be business, human kind of differentiators. Now, over time, and as we're building these tools, we are analyzing the market very quickly. So we're always trying to build a product that on some sort of competition field, we can say, look, we're a little less expensive. We have 4 more features than this other group. So we're always trying to build the best product. But what does that mean? I mean, maybe a large organization will see both of us from their vantage point and see these products as very similar. So we're certainly always trying to build the absolute best product, but there's a lot of other things that I think are going to go into being us, having us be different and better than someone else versus just the technology.
because what you're saying to me really is that and you won't say it quite this way, you're far too introspective and modest for it, but the secret sauce at UGenome is Zach Brooks and the
Oh
background
gosh.
that led to this philosophy. So tell us a little bit more about your early background.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I won't say that. I mean, certainly I'm influential to the company with my own role and so forth. We have a phenomenal team of people. I mean, I could talk about all of them in length. I mean, a great, I'll just talk about 2 of them right now. The other co-founder is the chief genomics officer, is a pharmacist by training. He was a professor of pharmacy and so forth. He's a phenomenally smart guy. Our chief strategy officer received his PhD in engineering from Oxford in the UK, and he's been around multiple 15 life science companies at this point. So we have a phenomenal team as well. But I think if I go back to a little bit of your earlier question, I think a lot of what drives me in my leadership roles with UGenome is very much my thinking as a self-help author. I'm trying to distill fairly dense information into fairly simple ways to digest that information, but really importantly, use that information. I mean, if you just think about all of science we have, it's plenty, it's massive. But how is science going to improve our lives if we don't make it applied for us today? So I'm very much an applied thinker, trying to think, how do we apply this particular technologies today? So in terms of my PhD, my thesis was in bilingual decision making. And so bilingual decision making probably is what it sounds like. I studied 2,000 people, non-native speakers of English, also native speakers of English, to find out if they make a different decision under the same circumstances. And what I found is oftentimes second language speakers make better decisions than first language speakers. And why would they do that? Well, it's because they're slowing down a little bit more. And when you slow down a little bit more, you actually give yourselves an opportunity to make a better decision when it comes to logic, mathematic, arithmetic, kind of those types of decisions. So if I think about applying that to UGenome, well, it's not that we have to go faster always. Means we have to do things better. And how do we do things better? Well, we can put small little things in place so we kind of slow down just a tiny bit. And when I say slow down, it might be like a half second slower on any individual decision to give ourselves that little bit of time to make a slightly better decision. And then we get to the butterfly effect. If we're putting, 10 processes in place in December 2024, well, those can be, 150 or 10,000 or whatever the number is in 2 years from now. So a lot of my philosophy comes from like my broad-based background. I speak multiple languages. This is my fifth startup company. I've written 2 self-help books, bilingual decision making. I was a Hollywood B-level actor and so forth. So I'm trying to put lots of different things into how we build technologies beyond just making the best technologies possible.
When I think about you, I think about that Beatles song, The Long and Winding Road.
Okay. Thank you. I haven't heard that before, but I like it. Thank you. That's a very nice, yeah, it's a very nice compliment. I'll take it as a compliment. Thank you, Tim. That's really
Good.
cool. Yeah.
So, you've been this B actor and you were
Horrible.
a roofer in Germany at some point.
Yeah, I
All
studied
these
international public law in
disparate,
Germany.
you know, odd jobs or whatever you want to call it. Um,
Yeah.
have you thought about at all? Have you stepped back and said, you know, I am this way because this happened to me?
Yeah, I think about it a fair amount, but I don't have that much time to think about it because I'm constantly trying to like figure out how to make whatever I step into work out, like really lean into things, like, but truly lean into them. Like you lean into, you can't reflect more than a little while. Like I am very much a thinker, but I'm really trying to like convert that thinking into some action always. So, a lot of this has been some form of survival. I wanted to go to Europe. I couldn't figure it out quickly, so I just went to Germany, $100 and a one-way ticket, and figured it out.
Right.
And then I ended up speaking German and Spanish and some other things. So a lot of it's just very much trying. And the other thing that really drives me is um, this is back to decision sciences a little bit. So decision sciences calls this anticipated regret. So I've lived most of my life with this idea of anticipated regret. So the idea there is that you think about a future situation in which you make a decision or do not make a decision, and how you're going to feel in that future state if you do X or don't do X. And anytime I think there's any chance I'm going to regret from not trying something, I absolutely do it. And so that's probably led me more than anything else to do the multiple things that I've done. And I don't know, to me, there's a through line through all of them. I would think most of them, I would say the through line is anticipated regret. But the other through line is more like some general metaphor from like Raman spectroscopy, optical sciences, is that there's a lot of light in the world. And if you put light against light, you have some other lights that come out of it. You put, rub two bits of flint stone together, get a certain kind of light from that. And it's really fun to rub rocks together and to see what sparks come out of that, those particular two rocks. And then from that light source that comes out of those two rocks, there's something very special and precious that you can pursue with rubbing two rocks together.
Interesting. Now you have me thinking of impressionism or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were involved in a couple of startups you mentioned in the Valley. I think it was VeriSign and E-Trade.
Yeah, so I was at E-Trade first. I was there for about 4 months before it was a public company. So when I was there, it still looked like a pretty large corporation. I think it was only 100 and so people. So it had still a lot of the startup people there. But I think with 4 months later, they went IPO. This is like 1998, I think it was, or seven. And they wanted me to move immediately to a different city. I just moved to the Bay Area, so I decided not to go with them. But it was fun to see a startup that was matured and exciting, but it was still like massive hustle. And I was working 6 days a week, 60 hours a week at E-Trade in the transfer of accounts. And then within a week, I got a job at VeriSign, and VeriSign was the S behind HTTPS. Um, and did different things, their business development and so forth. But the title I usually share with people is cryptographic business operations. So me with a group of people, we're spinning code for all sorts of things. Because at the time, people didn't want to use the internet for banking transactions. They didn't trust you could go from point A to point B and have information shared securely. So that's what we were doing at the companies, making sure people could trust those transactions, go from point A to point B. And that one, I was definitely there 2 years before we went to an IPO. I think I was employee number 100 roughly. So I definitely got a lot of startup vibe and energy from VeriSign. And then in my own life, I've started different nonprofits and so forth. So I very much like being around things that start from scratch. And the more I'm doing it, though, the more I want to see this growth, like building a garden. Like you plant some seeds and you want to see your garden grow. So I expect and want UGenome to be a very successful company, and I'm looking forward to having this garden grow. And from this garden, we employ people with good incomes and then get people really good treatment options. So yeah, I've been around a couple of companies at this point, and from each of them, you learn either if you're directly in a leadership role or you're downstream, you feel good leadership, you feel good management, or you feel not good management, or you feel bad leadership. So I'm very conscious that the decisions I make and we make as a leadership team very much incorporate people's ideas from the outset. Very much like how we treat each other as leaders has a big impact on how well we're going to be as a company and how people just feel about us being around UGenome.
You mentioned being involved in some nonprofits, and I know that you're the founder of World Transplant Athletes, and you're
Mhm.
athletically inclined, shall we say.
Yeah.
Um, how has that impacted um, your sense of self and sense of mission for the company? And what's it all about?
Yeah, well, I grew up playing lots of sports. Soccer was my best. I ended up playing soccer in Europe when I was 17 for a couple months. So
Wow.
we went on the soccer tour throughout Europe. It was called the Colorado Select Team. So kind of an all-star team of Colorado 17-year-olds playing
Oh, wow.
soccer in Europe. So, fairly decent. I played in college, not at a big college, but, played in college. So I really enjoy that. With my transplants in my life, I couldn't be as athletic as I wanted to. So once I got done with my first and second transplant, I did different things. After my first transplant, I was in a dance company for a couple of years. After my second one, I jumped back into my athletic life. But that second transplant really launched me into advocacy for organ transplantation. So I've advocated internationally, nationally, statewide, and locally. Eventually formed World Transplant Athletes. And so we're trying to do two main things there. One is like do some basic research on the importance of physical exercise for the health of the transplant recipient for two reasons. One, for that individual, but two, for the system. And the big problem there, saving someone's life through a transplant is a huge acute event. You save their life, fantastic. But in that process, the patient themselves is rarely taught or told, hey, you should go for walks regularly. You should go swimming. You should go for a small hike. You should do these things because the doctors and nurses and all these wonderful people are trying to save this person's life. But what we're finding is that people, when they exercise more, not surprisingly, but especially people with transplants, when they exercise more, the life of their graft is longer, they're healthier, they're using system resources less often. So World Transplant Athletes is about having information and then sharing that very directly to the same community, transplant recipients. And so we have 4,000 followers on our Instagram page for world transplant athletes, and creating programming and different research opportunities to have research that we can share immediately to the same community.
Is there some possibility sometime in the future that the Pro PX could be used to better manage the, arm's length worth of pills and things that a transplant recipient has to take? To
Well,
better,
I sure hope so. I mean, my long-term goal is that, do so well with UGenome that I can then fund world transplant athletes, whether I'm like just on a board, send them a seat, or our president or whatever else, that we can fund it through very direct advocacy and help. And I think that would be one great use case, is that people have a real sense of, before the transplant even, okay, you have IgA nephropathy, fairly rare cause of kidney failure, or something rare. Great. Let's do a little analysis in your body. You're going to get a transplant, and the genetic marker is going to be 3 out of 6, whatever the number is going to be. But throughout the process, have a sense of which medications are best throughout the process for that particular patient. So maybe at the end of that, they take some management medications for 6 months after their transplant, but eventually it could be off medications directly. So I would love to find use cases for UGM to work more with my world transplant athletes. That would be a wonderful outcome for me personally, but I think broadly for groups of people.
do an individual's pharmacogenetics, do they change throughout their lifetime? Or once you've done the test, that's it for life and you can make these applications?
Yeah, I'm certainly. I think the plausible answer is yes. Like the data I've seen, I would say still kind of have to explore this. But one of the things we're pursuing for 2025 as a company, UGenome, is really diving in and doing lots of reports and research on women's health. So women's health, I think, is fascinating just from some intellectual perspective. It's massively obnoxious from just a human perspective. Who cares about 50% of the population? Women go through their cycles on a monthly basis. They have menopause and so forth in the course of a woman's lifetime. Certainly, their body is changing frequently. So having some like frequent tracking of their bodies and what's going on is, I think, can be extremely helpful and useful. That's beyond just transplantation or anyone in kind of healthcare environment. There's a regular occurrence that happens for 50% of the population or a big portion of their lives. And after that occurrence, there's menopause, which is a whole different kind of thing. So I think from that perspective, if we can learn more as an organization and see how our pharmacogenomic solutions can help women, then we can try to find partnering options with lots of other fantastic groups out there doing more than we're doing. And if we can be junior partners to support women's health in some capacities, we would love to do that.
Do you see UGenome being accessed by larger pharma um, as a direct input to drug development then?
Yeah, we're exploring that. Right now, the use cases aren't quite bright. It's not quite, the path hasn't been lit for us, so we're exploring that certainly. So if we could at some point help people test whether or not XYZ medication is going to have a response on a certain group of patients or not, that would be really helpful. Now, what we've been told oftentimes when they're going through a clinical study, the people in those clinical studies already have a pretty good sense of how those drugs are going to work on patients and so forth. So, but I think there might be a situation we haven't yet found where our set of solutions can really be helpful in that space. So we're still exploring that. And if we find something, we'll jump in and we'll help in some capacity.
What's your vision for UGenome 5 years from now, 10 years?
Yeah, so the way we've written our pro forma is that by 2029, we want to be large enough and successful enough, either we're in a position to acquire someone or that someone acquires us. That would just be from a raw acquisition exit kind of standpoint. Things below that are probably just as important to me, is that, the core people we have, if it's 5 people or 100 people or whatever the number is, they're treated very well. They have good incomes for their families and the people they care about and so forth. And that people, when they come across UGenome, say, wow, they really helped me in some significant way. And we have data to prove that and so forth. So, I have 3, it's kind of a Matryoshka doll. The big part of the Matryoshka doll from an exit perspective, someone acquires us for, a 3 100 million plus kind of amount for doing great things. Cool, that would be nice. Or we're good enough that we just continue to build this successful large organization. But fundamentally, that we stick to our mission, vision, values. We treat people well.
The joint venture between Georgia Tech and Emory in bioengineering, which has done just great things and is now very highly rated after just a few years. And in terms of engendering an entrepreneurial spirit among the academics at those two institutions. And so that's something that you've been active in at University of Arizona. And I wonder if maybe you could tell us more about sort of what your mission is there, your thought process, and the way that you're moving forward. How do you help people make that leap?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. A lot of things. I think that fundamentally, all these technologies and the profits made for the need to constantly fund basic research. Like some incredibly smart, fantastically smart physicists today can be working on a technology for 2070. So we need basic research for these things, right? A lot of what we're benefiting now, GPS was done in the 60s, or, a lot of things we're benefiting now were done 70 years ago. So I think we definitely need to have basic research. And as such, you want to make sure you support academic institutions in very fundamental ways, the way we have done for many, many years. At the same time, there has to be better education and better incentive structures at universities. So universities reward professors for jumping in and developing intellectual property. Professors themselves need to understand the system. So if they're not going to be a CEO themselves, maybe they don't want to be because they're not really, that's not their thing. They like doing the research, but understanding the system well enough so they, when they operate with their commercialization office, they already have a better sense of like, this is a long-term process to take your technology and make it into a product. So I think, education throughout the system is really important so people understand each segment, every role and so forth. My role is very much working with an institution, looking at the technology, assessing that, and then making that into a full-fledged company that builds products. But I can't do this without these 4 or 5 other people before me. And maybe we'll get to a point we need to then, a VC would have to purchase what we're doing. So I think it's really just important to understand the importance of every single element on this spectrum, however that spectrum is defined. I think that's really the most important thing.
How do you, it seems to me that one of the most sort of difficult realities about changing from an academic to an entrepreneur is the fear for personal financial distress, I guess. Not doing as well once you've left this comfort of a university or
Yeah.
a big drug company, whatever it happens to be. How do you talk to a potential founder about that financial sort of discomfort?
Well, I think that's a reality. So I think if they step into the world of being into an entrepreneurship role, they have to accept that it's a very different reality. Now, it can be more exciting, but financially, it's going to be more terrifying. That's absolutely true. Now, if you're talking to an adjunct faculty who happens to have some intellectual property, he or she would be like, oh, it's the same as my life right now, because an adjunct faculty is not going to get paid that well. So I
Right.
think they wouldn't worry about this as much. So I think it's just a reality, and it's a trade-off. I mean, and a lot of folks, they don't want to do my role, but they do want to be involved in some capacity. And there's a lot of space for a lot of folks who, like, they want to keep their very nice role and a great position in research and teaching some students and the rest of it, and have this affiliation with the company. And they can operate as chief medical officers and chief scientific officers. They can do really important things while someone else does the hard work of getting a company off the ground.
Any particular advice you'd give um, to that person?
Yeah, I would kind of go back to the thing I said earlier, anticipated regret. So if you're a professor and have some kind of thing, like if you think you're going to regret not trying it later, then do it. And guess what? In 6 months, if it doesn't work out for you, that's okay. Because that experience of like taking a little bit of risk and learning really makes your life generally better, because you're never going to look back and say, ah, I wish I'd done X, Y, and Z. I think anticipated regret is such a powerful, it's one of the favorite things I've learned in decision science is like, it's such a powerful little mindset. Like, how I'm going to feel if I don't do this. And if you think you're going to feel bad, then do it.
And there are very few mistakes you make in life, almost none, really, that when you're 67, as I am, you look back and go, that was really bad. You forget about
That
them.
was the worst thing I've ever
After
done.
6 months, no matter really how bad they were, they're
Yeah,
over and you're on to the next thing. So
exactly. Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
it's kind of anticipated regret in reverse.
Yeah. No, it's really powerful. I think it's a really powerful thing. I don't know. I think, it's jumping into the process, but also appreciating that it's much harder than you can anticipate. I mean, I think for professors sometimes, so professors are sort of professional learners. They're extremely smart. They're very good at learning quickly, and they have an assumption they can learn quickly and apply what they learned very quickly to that next situation, which you can theoretically do, right? But try to get into the world of customer acquisition. Like, that's a 2-year slog, and there's nothing necessarily that's perfectly intellectually aligned with whatever model you have in your mind
Right.
about that. And so you have to appreciate, like, this Bob or Jane or whoever else sitting across the table who looks like this fancy business development person. Maybe they look like that, maybe they are, but that person probably has sweated through gazillions of sales conversations to get that one kind of thing. And I think professors have to kind of appreciate how hard it is to do business.
That's where maybe a little bit of time as a B actor might help.
Yeah, well, I mean, being a B-level Hollywood actor really prepared me for being a startup person, because when you walk into a room and just because the way you look, someone says, "Thank you," which means get out of this room. I never want to see your face again. You're the worst actor I've ever seen. Probably with some merit. I probably was the worst actor they ever saw. But that rejection over and over again is actually pretty helpful to be a startup person.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Zach, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I wish you all the luck in the world at UGenome. I think you're going to do big things. So
Yeah,
I'd be
thank you,
interested
Tim. We
in
expect the
following
same.
up sometime in
What's
the
that, Tim?
future.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I appreciate the opportunity. It's great to talk to you today. Great questions.
Thanks for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech Podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.